Great. Hello, hello. Welcome to Creation Care 101, session 3.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. So wonderful to see everyone. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Stephanie. Oh my goodness. So wonderful to see everyone. Hello. Hi, Jennifer. Hello, hello. Wonderful to see everyone. Session 3, hosting honorable gatherings. So wonderful to see you all.
Probably won't be on video for long because I'm on my phone and it's running out of sauce. So
no problem.
No worries at all. Nice to see you, Chandra. Hello, hello. Hi, Susie. Wonderful to see everyone. Hope everyone is having a good evening. We had lots of folks earlier too, and this is so wonderful to see everyone. Again, welcome. Please say hello in the chat, who and where you are, and if you'd like, share the most meaningful gathering you've recently attended. That would be wonderful. So welcome as folks continue to arrive. Yes, please say hello in the chat and where you are and who you are and where you are. That would be wonderful. And any meaningful gatherings. Oh, wow.
It's Master
Naturalist meeting. Wonderful, Army. That sounds fantastic. Hello again, Chandra. Yes. Oh, wow. You're in New Zealand, Susie. That's wonderful. Had a great Bible study last night. Hi, Alice. Alice is in Phoenix. Mission meeting. Wonderful. Goodness.
Susie, just out of curiosity, what time is it for you in New Zealand?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
It's not bad at all. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, wonderful.
Fantastic. Better than the other side. 4 in
the morning would be no good.
We have been to New Zealand and it is just beautiful there too. So wonderful. And hi, Eric. Great to see everyone. And I'm going to put in, we just had a combined family birthday. Yes.
November's birthday month in our family, so
3 generations birthdays. So a sweet, sweet time. And hello to the folks who are just coming in. Hi, Mimi and Leah. Goodness.
All right, let's
Hi, Diana. Okay, we're gonna move on to again. Welcome to Creation Care 101. This is session 3, hosting honorable gatherings. And we welcome again over 100 churches from across the country and lots of folks from amongst those churches as well, and across 10 denominations. It is such a blessing to gather and to steep into these things and to continue to learn together. Thank you again for being here with us, and thank you for the work many of you have already done and are continuing to do, and thank you for all of those of you who this is new for and you're coming to with curiosity. So thank you so much. We want to just take a little bit of space here and just ground this time in prayer. So if you would all pray with me. Oh, dear God, goodness, thank you for each of us here and for your love for each of us and our love for you and for each other and all of creation. Lord, guide us as we continue to understand and learn more about how our faith and how we host and do our gatherings are connected, and how we can gather to your glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. And welcome to the folks who have been coming in during some of the prayer time. We're going to move on to a plan for our time. So again, we will run about 90 minutes, and a specific plan for our time. We've done the welcome and the prayer, and we will go into a time of education and then into some conversation, into 2 breakout rooms, and get a chance to chat with each other. And then Russ will be sharing our case study back to Hope Community Church, an example of some of the implementation, and then we will move into the ever important implementations steps and some tools. So we look forward to this time together. We want you to feel at home in this space. So a few hospitality notes. We will be recording this session so that it can be shared with those who aren't able to attend, but the breakout rooms will not be recorded. And we will be monitoring the chat as usual. So please feel free to address me, Becky, privately in the chat if there's something specific you need, or feel free to address the whole chat to the whole group. Again, too, please know you don't have to take any notes unless you really, really want to. As we will be emailing you next week a recording, as well as some of the implementation links and tools. So that will be there for you early next week, probably by Tuesday, I believe. And Russ and I, you're familiar with Russ. Russ and I will be available after this session for any questions you may have or any feedback that you'd like to share as well. So please know that. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Russ, who's going to head us into our discussion of hosting honorable gatherings.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking your time this evening. We know that it's a commitment to show up to have a conversation about these things, and we really, really appreciate it. So session 3, hosting honorable gatherings. And if you think about it, in session 2, we spent a lot of time talking about food and the environmental impact of our food choices. And we're really kind of continuing that discussion of things around the table and asking not necessarily about food this time, but maybe about the ways that we serve food. Think about the plates and cups and napkins and all of those things that go into hosting a gathering and having people be present. So this is a continuation of our conversation from last month, and last month we also introduced this good framework, and this is that idea of if we're going to make decisions that honor our relationship to God and that honor our relationship to each other. When we're trying to make good decisions, we might think of things that are good for us, good for neighbor, good for the created world that we share, and good across time. And we try to do these things all together where we can. So at any rate, we introduced this last month. We're going to talk about this again as we go through this session. And just to tee up a couple of things, we are going to dive into the environmental and ethical and financial impacts of hosting, looking at the ways that we host and the options that we have. We'll continue to repeat this theme that small changes sustained over time really do add up to big impacts. We're going to kind of explore this idea of what is the cost of convenience. We know things like disposable items are convenient and easy, but there's a cost associated with them. And what is that? And as always, we're going to look for opportunities where we can be hopeful. We know that there's a lot of negative information in this environmental discussion, particularly. And as Christians, we're called to be hopeful. And we really try to find those opportunities and reasons to be hopeful in spite of what we're working through. So to start this conversation, we're actually going to open with an interview with Dr. Ruth Valerio. And Becky, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick overview of Dr. Valerio, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Russ. Yes, so this is Dr. Ruth Valerio. Ruth is a theologian, environmentalist, social activist, and author. She is the Global Advocacy and Influencing Director for Tear Fund, which carries a vision to inspire and equip Christians to a whole life response to poverty, helping build a movement that brings about lasting change on the issues that impact the poorest and the most vulnerable. She holds a doctorate in theology from King's College London and honorary doctorates from the universities of Winchester and Chichester. She is canon theologian at Rochester Cathedral and is the author of several books, two of which, one is called L is for Lifestyle, Christian Living That Doesn't Cost the Earth, and Just Living, Faith and Community in an Age of Consumerism. And she has written the Archbishop of Canterbury's 2020 Lent book entitled Saying Yes to Life. And Kaylee Kastenheiser, who some of you have seen in prior sessions from our Creation Care 101 team, interviews Ruth. And the core of the conversation Kaylee and Ruth had together was about how ethical consumerism is relational, not transactional, based on a vision of membership where community is the smallest unit of economic flourishing, as Wendell Berry writes in his essay, Health as Membership. So to set the context for this interview, we asked Dr. Ruth Valerio to reflect on if and how she saw Wendell Berry's concept of health as membership, of deep relationship at the heart of the gospel and as a through line in her book. So let's dive into the interview with Kaylee and Ruth.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. For me, a relational understanding of the gospel is what is at the heart of the book, and at the, more importantly, at the heart of my life, and at the heart, I really think, of what the gospel is all about. And so Jesus came to restore relationships, of course, between ourselves and God. We know that that's the fundamental basis of our faith. But then also he came to restore relationships between ourselves. So Galatians 3:28, Ephesians 2, other places, that ministry of reconciliation with one another. Mm-hmm. And then Colossians 1:15-20, Romans 8, he also came in order to restore our relationship with the whole wider natural world. And so the good news of Jesus Christ isn't only about restored individual relationship with God, but it's about that restoration of relationship on a holistic level. Mm-hmm. So when I think about the kind of the way that I shop, the food I buy, the kind of clothes that I wear, it's not just about a transactional responsibility. It comes down to me wanting to live in a way that lives out that gospel of relationship. So thinking about who is my neighbor and how can I be a neighbor? I think about my neighbor living thousands of miles away, who picks my tea or sews my clothes, and I want to be a good neighbor to them. Or I think about creatures living in my garden, in my own space, or in other ecosystems around the world, and I'm called to be a good neighbor to them and to restore my relationship with them. So at the heart of the gospel is that concept of relationship, and it's out of that we then want to live in ways that respect this world and all the creatures that live in it, human and wider.
Yeah, that you spoke so beautifully there too, at the heart of the gospel being this ministry of reconciliation and partnering with God in reconciling all of these relationships in the world. And we find ourselves in a broken system. And also parts of, we have participated in the brokenness of that system. Yeah. And so I wonder if we have this vision of Christianity and being a Christian, being a follower of Christ, as participating in this work of reconciliation of all of these relationships, ourselves, our neighbors, the created world. You asked this question in the book of what and how do we live well then as Christians in this consumer society that we find ourselves within, in this broken system that we find ourselves within. So I wonder how you would reflect on that.
Yeah, I think we live in a highly consumer society that wants to train us and form us to live in particular ways and to carry particular values and characteristics. So it teaches us that money is God and that possessions are God and they're what we should seek after with all our heart. It teaches us that other people are there to produce our goods. They're there to give us what we need. That fundamentally we are the most important ones, and other people are just there to serve us, and divides us into producers and consumers. And similarly with the wider natural world, our consumer society teaches us to see it as the environment, just something that's there to serve us and give us what we need. And all of that goes against what we see in the scriptures as to that we can't serve God and money. Money is not our God, God is. And we're to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness and justice, rather than seeking after lots of possessions and a comfortable life. It teaches us to put the other first rather than ourselves. And the Bible teaches us that the wider world isn't there just for us to use and abuse. It's there for us to cherish and enjoy and to live in as part of the wider natural world. So there's a real challenge on us as we live in this culture that wants to form us in a particular way. How actually can we root ourselves in Christ and in disciplines and habits and practices so that we're formed rather in the likeness of Christ? And that's what Just Living really is an exploration of.
Yeah, no, it's such this tension, which I think in the book you describe as this invitation to the middle way. This tension of belonging to this world that God loves, but also making sure that in that mutual belonging, we are creating ever more and more a world of these reconciled relationships, rather than becoming more and more complicit in the broken relationships and breaking more and more of them. So I wonder if we have this call as Christians to think differently about consumerism, even that term consumerism, what might, if we were to make a choice, just a choice about a particular item that we might need. So if I'm a church and I need to buy a plate for my congregation, how might I begin to think very practically about this choice of buying a plate from a theological framework of mutual reconciliation? How would I practically walk through a choice like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to reflect on what you were saying before, for me, it's around the tension between loving the world too much and not loving it enough. And I think when we look at different Christian expressions of being a part of society, we see different ways that tension hasn't always been navigated well. So do we love the world enough, or do we love it too much? When it comes to thinking about what we buy, I think there are basic questions to ask around how has it got here? What has it been made from? Has it been made from something that is lasting? Has the natural environment been damaged by the extraction that's been needed to make it? Is it something that's going to be durable, or is it something I'm just going to throw away and replace? What about the people who've been involved in those processes? Have they been paid a proper wage for growing it or rearing it or making it? It's a kind of list of questions like that, some basic questions that I would say are probably pretty hard to answer fully when it comes to buying a plate. But we may be able to think of those questions, particularly around, say, the food that we buy and consume, and the clothes that we wear, and I'm just looking at my laptop as I talk to you, the technology that we use. But even with plates, I would have thought the main question there is around whether it's disposable or not. Has it come from plastic? Are we going to wash it up and use it again, or are we just going to dump it and then buy another one another time?
Mhm.
And as you go through this journey, as you learn more, you develop what I call an ethical nose, a kind of ethical instinct, where it's impossible to know everything about everything, and things are very complicated. But you can develop a kind of instinct for the sorts of things that
Mhm.
that are good to do and that might be more, or the things that might be more harmful.
Mm. That's super helpful, Ruth. And if I could summarize what I heard in what you were sharing, and also just from reading that chapter, one of the kind of a framework or principles to think about in choices. Number one seems to be this question of, do I even need this?
Yeah.
And slowing down and to ask that initial question and identifying the difference between a want and a need. I think you
Can I just
described.
say with that, I've put in a little discipline in my own life that I'm never allowed to buy something straight off when I see it. If I'm in town or something, I always have to go home, wait a day, and then decide whether it's still something that I want, that I'm going to buy. And most of the time, I find that by that point, I think, no, actually, I don't really need it. It was just going to pass by.
Yeah, I think in your book you describe that exactly that way, as I don't impulse buy, which I think is a really helpful first step. And then this next thing that you're describing is asking these questions about, where did this come from? How was it made? And trying to walk through the complexity of those questions. And as you said, sometimes those questions don't have easy answers. Sometimes they don't have answers at all. And if that's the case, really trying to develop that ethical nose and getting better and better about identifying where things might have gone awry. And as you say in the book, paying attention to people, the environment, animals, and politics, and how those things might be at work in any of those places.
Can I point you to another resource that would help?
Please. Yeah.
This is a book that has come out more recently since just called L is for Lifestyle. And it's a really practical look at all of these kind of issues. It's a practical look at how we can live well in this world in a way that takes care of other people and takes care of the natural world. So reading this would help you develop that ethical nose.
Well, wonderful. And then the last point, and then we will let you go. But you spoke really well to this just now, and I just want to lift it up, that always this kind of fourth principle of balancing our budgets, what we can afford with the ethical implications of this purchasing choice. And really the best way to do that is, as you mentioned, to take this longer view of time. How is this purchasing choice good across time, not just for now? So I really found that to be helpful as well in thinking about what we were buying.
Right. And if I can just add on top of that, is not to feel guilty. I always say, do what you can, and then push yourself to do a little bit more. Don't feel guilty about the things that you can't do. Focus on what you can do. And there are no rules. We're all in different situations and have different family circumstances and different budgets and so on. So do what you can and focus on that, and don't worry too much or feel too guilty about the things that you can't do.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth. And then also to add to that we're not alone, that we have our communities that we are doing this with and can be creative with and make plans with. So thank you for helping us begin with our plans and thinking about just ways of engagement with how and what we buy. So I really appreciate your time. It's been such a joy to be with you.
Thank you. Well, bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much to Kaylee and Ruth for steeping us in this conversation. And I just wanted to point out, just really appreciate how Ruth pointed out the balance of giving ourselves grace while doing what we can to develop our ethical nose, and others around us doing the same thing, so that we can simultaneously be making choices that are good for us and good for our neighbor and good for creation. And we're going to walk through some of those things tonight.
Yeah.
So that said, I think we are going to move into some breakout rooms, and start some conversations with one another, which will be wonderful. And first of all, though, we are going, before we go in the breakout rooms, we do want to just do a gentle reminder of our community guidelines to, of course, help keep the Creation Care 101 program as meaningful and engaging and just honoring as possible. So again, the guidelines are to be present, to speak kindly, listen deeply, and share generously. We have so much we can learn from one another. Honor all voices, and of course, be open-hearted. And we are going to go into our breakout rooms. I'm going to put the questions in the discussion questions in the chat right now. And we just want to encourage you to copy those questions if you can real quick before we go into the breakout rooms. And then we'll be in the breakout rooms for about 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes.
And then you'll see a timer in the top right-hand corner of the breakout room. And then Russ is going to automatically bring us all back in together. So we will come back and just share briefly some takeaways and meaningful things that you want to share before we go on to our next section. So,
all right. Breakout rooms are ready. Here we go.
Tunnels.
See you all in a few minutes.
Welcome back, everyone.
See everyone. I hope you had a wonderful conversation in your small groups. And
yes, and we just want to take a few minutes to create some space to hear a few of any meaningful takeaways or highlights that came out of the your group discussion. We probably have time for 2 or 3 to share briefly.
yeah, maybe 1 or 2.
1 or 2. Okay. So if you just want to raise a hand and unmute, if anyone would love to share anything that came to mind, anything that surprised you, or a meaningful takeaway, we'd love to hear. Is that Ermi? Okay. You want to unmute?
Yes, it is. Very briefly, persistence appears to be the key. The pandemic has thrown many of us for a loop, and when it comes to using disposables again versus reusables, and keep talking.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ermi.
Thank you for sharing. And that's actually that's a great right there is a great transition into the next section of our material. And this question of disposables versus reusables versus compostables versus paper versus plastic, all of that, right? It's something that we wrestle with a lot. And when we think about the ways that we set our table to have our daily lunch and dinner, all those decisions show up multiple times every day. And so we're gonna take a few minutes and explore some of that in a little more detail. And when we get to the case study portion of revisiting this with Hope Community Church, our fictional church, we're actually going to go through wrestling with those questions and trying to make a decision of how we should go forward with those things. So it'll be fun. But before we do that, I want to just real quickly go back to the slide from our very first session. This is the drawdown rainbow graph. And just as a quick reminder, the gray box in the middle represents our atmosphere. This is where all of those greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon dioxide, the methane, all those things go up into our atmosphere. The left side of this graph, all of the 6 rainbow pieces on the left, those are the sources of where those greenhouse gases come from. The right side is the planet helping us out and taking greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. That's our forests and our land sinks, the coastal and ocean sinks. And if you notice, these 2 sides are out of balance, and about 60% of the emissions that we add every year stay in the atmosphere for up to hundreds of years, and basically just build up year over year over year. So this is a global look at where we are and where those sources come from. And as we think about these, the items related to our hospitality and hosting, these really fall into the industry and transportation categories. Industry is the making of all of the things that we purchase and use around the world. Transportation is moving those, the resources necessary to actually make those things, and then the completed items all over the place as we use them or prepare to use them. Together, those are about 35% of global emissions. There are some other things in there that aren't associated with the hospitality and stuff items that we use. So maybe 30% of it is represented there. So as we start to think about this question of paper versus plastic versus compostables, if we think about the paper in hospitality, most commonly, we're going to look at these items of paper plates, paper cups, napkins, paper towels, right? These are things that we all use in our homes and can use in our churches as well. But before we spend too much time looking at that, we have to talk about trees for just a second. And because these are paper things and paper starts with trees. So I spent some time looking at how much carbon is actually sequestered in a tree, in a forest. I know Dr. Valerio said in her talk that oftentimes it's hard to know. I made a serious effort to know what exactly goes into all of these paper and plastic and hospitality items. And she's right. It's oftentimes really hard to know, but we can get close. So we're going to start with a tree. So there's a little tiny speck on the left of your screen. That's actually a person. So imagine that person is, 5.5 feet tall, roughly. And we're going to look at Douglas fir trees. They're commonly used in the production of paper and lumber, especially in the United States. And one of the reasons that they are used so frequently is they grow fast. So a 10-year-old Douglas fir tree can be up to 30 feet tall. And just in those first 10 years, the tree will actually store over 1,000 pounds of carbon. And that's carbon that's primarily come from the atmosphere. And it's just amazing how quickly they grow. So that's already 5 times the size of a person, maybe 6 times the size of a person. In 20 years, that same tree will grow to 60 feet. It doubles in height. And it also gets a lot wider. The limbs get longer and the trunk gets wider. But within 20 years, the tree will have stored 8,000 pounds of carbon. By 30 years, we're up to 31,000 pounds of carbon. It's 95 foot tall. 40 years, it's 120 foot tall. By 50 years, it's grown to 140 feet tall. And it's stored almost 100,000 pounds of carbon over those first 50 years. Now, typically, when we think of trees being used in the processing of paper and wood and lumber, they're typically harvested somewhere between 30 and 50 years. So it's somewhere in that range that if we're in a managed forest environment, that to optimize for lumber production or paper production, that's typically where they'll get harvested. And as you can see, by doing that, we actually miss out on a huge potential for carbon storage had we just left those trees in place for another 20 years. The height of the tree is not the only story. If we think about this graph is very detailed, so don't worry about the letters and the numbers. If you think about this green portion of the graph, this is actually a forest. So this is the above ground part of all the trees. And below ground, we have a tremendous amount of biomass as well. These are all the roots, the fungi, the mycorrhizal network that exists below ground, and all the biological components that exist there as well, the earthworms and all kinds of little bacteria and things that live as part of that ecosystem underground. There's a tremendous amount of carbon stored underground as well in forest. And but we mentioned the idea that the trees don't just stay in most of our forests in the United States. They're managed forests where we're actually going to be taking stuff out to use in industry. So some of them in this orange portion here, some of those trees are cut and used for firewood. And so if you think about, say we took 50 years and stored 100,000 pounds of carbon in a tree, when we cut it and burn it, we're releasing that carbon as well as some other pollutants into the atmosphere through the burning of that process, and it's released right away. Alternatively, if we take that same tree and we turn it into boards that are used in a house, that carbon that was captured and stored might stay intact for 100 years as it's part of the boards and structure of our home. The byproducts of processing wood into timber actually gets pulped and used as paper. And this entire industry of loggers to sawmills to paper mills is actually relatively efficient. Almost all parts of the tree are used in some way, either for wood, for fuel wood, for pulp and paper. And recycling has a kind of a bad rap at the moment, right? We hear so much complaining about recycling. But when you look at paper, I was really surprised. In 2021, 68% of our paper products, paper and cardboard, were actually recycled in the United States. And there's actually some good news in the recycling front. As part of that research, I found that aluminum is over 90%. Over 90% of our aluminum in the United States is actually recycled. Glass actually does okay, not quite as good as paper. Plastic is an entirely different story, and we'll get to that in just a second. So at any rate, as we turn these things into products that we can use, they live kind of at the end of this graph, and at the end of their life in use, they actually go into landfills. And it's at that point that all that carbon that we captured back in the beginning in the growth cycles of the tree gets released back into the atmosphere. If it's in a landfill, it may convert into methane if it's in an environment without oxygen. And that can be a very potent greenhouse gas, up to 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So at any rate, this is kind of the whole life cycle. And when we try to do a carbon analysis or carbon footprint analysis of something like a paper plate, sorting through all of the complexity of where was it grown, where was it shipped to be processed, how much recyclable material was included, all of that complexity, there's no visibility into it. None of the manufacturers are reporting it. There's literally no way that you can get accurate information about sources, amount of energy use, amount of recycled material. In some cases, you can see that, but it's super, super challenging. And that's why when Dr. Valerio says, sometimes it's just really hard to know, that's actually true. So let's go back to these paper items. There are some things, though, that we can know. So one of them is, we mentioned this recyclability number. And in 2021, yes, 68% of paper products were recycled. But it's not these products. In fact, for food service items, these products, practically no food service items are recycled. And in most cases, food-related paper products are not recyclable. Food-contaminated items generally can't be recycled for paper. So this 68% of paper products, this is our newspapers, our office papers, cardboard. Cardboard's a huge component of that. And that's where the vast majority of our recycling actually comes from every year. And to circle back to that paper versus plastic question, if we look at the plastic items that live in our hospitality spaces, we think of things like paper cups and plastic cups and water bottles and all of the utensils that we use in our hospitality, right? The plastic forks and knives and spoons. One of the things that we have a pretty good guess about is how long it takes these things to break down once they go into landfills, and the vast majority of them do. And for these plastic cups and plastic bottles, the estimate is 450 years to actually break down. And while those are sitting in landfill, they're slowly kind of decomposing. There's a whole series of chemicals that get released as it breaks down, and it takes a tremendous amount of time. The plastic knives and forks are they're made out of a different type of plastic, and that can take up to 1,000 years to actually break down. And you might say, well, wait, a lot of these things are recyclable. What about recycling? And in fact, in 2021, only 5% of plastic waste was recycled in the United States. And in fact, if you look at this historically, and some of you may already know this, the highest we've ever been for plastic recycling is only 9.5%. So plastic recycling, of all of the different types of materials that we use, plastic recycling is tremendously broken. It has always been, and it's getting worse now that we don't have the option of offloading or exporting a lot of the plastic waste. So as we think about plastic, particularly, and particularly single-use plastic, I've come to the conclusion, Becky and I have come to the conclusion that if you're going to start anywhere in this discussion, starting with eliminating single-use plastic is absolutely the right place to start. And there are alternatives. And to really work through some of these alternatives, that's going to open us up to our case study. So give me just 1 second and we'll get this ready to go here. So we're going to revisit Hope Community Church. Hope Community Church, for those of you that have not been with us through the whole program, is a fictional church. Hope Community Church has around 200 members, and they've recently formed a green team, a literal green team in this case, and we gave them a face as well. And they're going to sit down and go through this same process of asking, how can we get rid of these single-use plastics and disposable items, and what other alternatives do we have? So the first thing that the green team is going to do is actually take inventory. The green team gets together, actually goes down to the church and just starts opening the cupboards to see what's in there. And in there they find these paper plates and paper cups and plastic cups. They find the napkins and paper towels and boxes of these plastic cutlery, and of course, stacks of water bottles or soda bottles, things that we share. And just being naturally curious, they asked the question, well, what do we use all this stuff for? And as they sat down and thought about it, well, it's the coffee hours on Sundays, it's the potlucks and meals together. Staff uses some of these things during the week. We have youth groups and Bible studies that meet at church or in homes, and these things get used. And we have all kinds of other celebrations and gatherings, picnics and things. And throughout the course of our life together in church, all of this stuff gets used. Well, continuing to be curious, the next question is, well, how much of it do we actually use, right? So they sat down and started counting, and they realized that in a month, they might go through 500 paper plates, 500 paper cups, 1,100 napkins and paper towels, 750 plastic utensils, and 500 drink water bottles as they go through. And all that adds up to 3,350 items in a single month. And as they've been starting to think about things over time, they looked at it and said, well, what if we did this for 10 years? How many items is that? And it turns out that that's a lot. It turns into 400,000 items over 10 years. And the next question that comes to mind was, well, what does all that cost? It sounds like a lot of items. What does it cost? And the thing that they found is that individually, these things don't cost that much. You know, a paper plate is 24 cents, a paper cup is 14 cents, a couple pennies for a paper towel. The drink bottles are a little over a quarter, and the most expensive item there. But adding all these up, it's only around $400 a month, not that much, right? But again, we look at that over time, and over 10 years, that's $400 a month becomes $46,000, right? And these things really start to add up significantly over time. So now that we have an idea of how much we use, how much it costs, we can ask this question of, well, what's the impact? What other impacts besides the cost are there? Well, those items generate 7,500 pounds of trash, and most of that trash will end up in the landfill. Somebody had to go buy all of those things, and there's gas and emissions and all kinds of things associated with buying those. It's 120 shopping trips probably if someone does it once a month. All those things came wrapped in plastic bags. Somebody had to track the receipts and turn them in for reimbursement. And we also generated 54,000 plastic bottles in the process of using this. The paper that goes into actually making these items represents 142 trees. And these are all secondary impacts to the cost and the storage space, the time that went into actually doing this. I took an effort, I took a shot at estimating the environmental impact of this. Know that this is just an estimate. Know that if we were to look at your particular case, it would be different. Stanford University actually did an attempt at actually looking at a dinner party and looking at all of the items in the dinner party. And some of this material comes from there. They estimate that the paper products are around 4 grams each. So for a paper plate, a cup, paper towels and napkins, carbon emissions around 4 grams each. Those utensils, those plastic utensils, once we move into plastic, things go up a lot. Around 13 grams for the plastic utensils each, and the water bottles, 150 grams. Now, 150 grams is an estimate. There is a tremendous range. I saw a study that looked at the carbon footprint of Fiji water that was actually imported from Fiji, and that was as high as 800 grams. And I saw another study that actually looked at, it was done by the Water Bottle Association, that had it as low as 80 grams. So we're going to use 150 for this example. And if we look at those same 400,000 items over 10 years, we actually see that we're at 11,000 kilograms of carbon. And just as a point of comparison, if you remember back in session 1, Hope Community Church estimated that their annual carbon footprint was 75 metric tons. And this is the equivalent of 11 metric tons. So a metric ton is 1,000 kilograms. So this is 11,000 kilograms, 11 metric tons of carbon emissions just in these paper and plastic items used in our hospitality. So obviously the next question is, well, how else can we do this? And there's really 2 choices. We can look at compostable items, and this may be a conversation you might have started or had already in your church, or we can look at reusable items, and these would be things like ceramic plates and ceramic cups and glass cups, things like that.
Porcelain plates.
Porcelain plates, thank you. For compostable items, I just want to remind you that we're going to, in session 5, we're actually going to have a long discussion about composting, trash, and particularly around compostable items. Unless you actually compost them, there's no real environmental difference between a normal paper plate and a compostable one. Because if they both end up in landfill, the impact is going to be very similar. If they go through a composting process, then we can have a different process. So just realize that A is dependent on there actually being a way to compost those items. And let's go through this. Option A, compostable items. The green team went out and found compostable plates and cups, paper towels, compostable utensils. You can get these made out of corn or other vegetable materials. When they came to water bottles, they realized there's really not an option for a compostable, disposable water bottle. It's just, they don't exist. They're not in the market at the moment. But they did find these actual stainless steel water bottles, but they're $6.42 each. So that was a real question of can we do anything with the water bottles or not? When we looked at the reusable items, the green team was able to find plates for $3.87, cups for $3.50, cotton hand towels to replace all those paper towels and napkins for $1.34 each, the utensils for $1, and water bottles for, again, the $6.42, the same issue. And as we think about these reusable items, everybody was obviously like, well, but wait, this isn't the only cost. We also have to wash them, right? So we're going to need a couple dishwashers. We're going to need washer and dryer for all those hand towels. And if we go to reusable water bottles, we probably need some water bottle stations to fill them up so people can get water at church. Those things all need installed. They need operated and maintained over time. And some of those reusable items will probably break. So there's costs associated with all of those things. Well, let's go back to costs and let's switch back to option A, the compostables. What do those things cost? We look at those same 400,000 items. And in this example, we're going to assume that we don't do anything about the water bottles. You might remember our monthly cost was around $390. So our costs have gone up a little bit here because the compostable items are a little bit more expensive. And over time, that $46,000, actually, this would turn into $53,000. So it's not a big difference monthly, but it is over time. But if we try to do something about the water bottles, what if we actually said, well, we're going to buy 2 water bottles for every person in church. We're going to buy 400 of those water bottles and see how that goes. If we use that example, and even if we bought 400 of those water bottles at $6.42, over 10 years, our cost actually comes down. So the savings from the reusable water bottles is actually huge. And that can offset the extra cost of some of the compostable items. So if you're able to do something there, can actually make the economics of it work really well. What about reusables? Well, we do that same thing. We look at those costs. Let's buy a plate and a cup for every person in church. Let's buy a couple of hand towels for every person in church. Utensils, and those same 400 water bottles. We look at those costs over 10 years, it's only $4,400. Now, again, we're comparing this to $46,000 that we were spending for those same disposable items. But as we know, this isn't the full story. We have to look at all those other things, right? So let's buy a couple of dishwashers and get them installed. Let's buy some water filling stations and get those installed. Let's buy a washer and dryer. It's assumed for this model that the church has none of these things in place. And we know that some of you may have commercial kitchens already in place. You may have some of this equipment already there. But we'll assume that we need to buy all of this and get it set up. And that's another $9,000 almost. All of these things need to be operated. So as we run that dishwasher, it uses soap and energy, and running a load in a dishwasher costs about 88 cents. And over 10 years, that would be $1,800. Doing laundry once a week for all of those hand towels that we might use, another $655. We'll need water filters for the water filling stations. And we know some of those items that we're using will break, get lost or damaged, and we'll have to replace them. So those are replacements for all of those reusable items. That's another $5,300. We add all of those things up. The item cost itself is actually the smallest cost of all of these things. This extra equipment cost, again, you think about your situation, you may have some of these things in place already, but the operating costs actually are more cost than the reusable items themselves. And when you put all this together, it's still only $18,000. So again, we've bought 400 reusable items, the equipment to actually wash and clean those things. We've operated it for 10 years, and the cost is still only $18,000. So thinking back to those original items we started with, our original cost was $46,787. We compare those to the alternatives. Our compostables came out at $39.88 if we can do something with the drink bottles. Again, the reusable bottles are a huge part of this discussion. The reusable items, the initial cost is only $4,400. The equipment and operating costs are there. And grand total is still $18,000. So this seems really clear, right? If we just chose those reusable items, we might think about, well, how do we make this choice? If we went reusable, we would save $28,000, right? Reducing all of those items that are going into landfills would actually reduce 7,500 pounds of trash out of the landfills. Saving money is good for us, good for the church. Saving these things from going into landfills is good for neighbors. It's also good for the environment. Just reducing the paper that was used in making those products is 142 trees that we would save from needing to be cut down. But there's one other thing that we need to think about. As we think about what we would choose with this, we realize that there's one more piece we haven't quite counted, and that's the volunteers needed to actually wash those dishes, to set them out every time, to get everything ready to go. And that's a real issue in talking about it. Now, some churches might have a commercial kitchen where you're required to pay staff to actually wash those dishes. So you might have some labor costs associated with that. Water is another factor. But just know in looking at water, making paper is a tremendously water intensive activity. In fact, they estimate that a single plate or a single paper cup can use as much as 8 gallons of water in preparation for it. In comparison, you can run an entire load in a dishwasher for about 10 gallons of water. So, you think about how many things you could put in a dishwasher. There's a lot of variability in there, but generally you're going to come out way ahead from water usage with reusables than you will with using paper. So in thinking about this, there's lots of process, lot to think through. And the green team, and just remember, but wait, this isn't only just about the church. What about home? What about our houses? Our church is made up of people, and people use these things as well. Our congregation does. What does that look like? Well, we take just a family of 3 and we do the same exercise. We say, okay, just for an exercise, imagine a family used paper products for every meal. What would that look like? Well, that would be 284,000 items over the course of 10 years. 32,000 paper plates, 100,000 plastic utensils over the course of 10 years, and 43,000 drink bottles, water bottles, and soda bottles. All that costs money. It adds up to $31,000. And if we compare that to the alternative at home of, could we just buy reusable items? Yeah, that actually works out like this. Let's buy a dozen plates and cups, 50 hand towels that we can use instead of paper towels, 24 utensils, and a dozen reusable water bottles. All of those things add up to just $239. Let's assume that the family also is starting from scratch and needed to buy a dishwasher and a washing machine and a dryer. You can spend $3,000 for those things and operate them over the course of 10 years for another $4,500. So even if you're starting from scratch and the family needed to buy all of those things, the total is still only $7,700. And let's say you even wanted to get really nice plates and cups. You could spend 5 times the amount of money. You could spend $1,000 on these reusable items and still come out way ahead compared to the cost of the disposables. And this is such a great example of how those little costs, 15 cents for a paper cup or a plastic cup, 2 or 3 cents for a paper towel. We don't add all those things up. But when we look at it over time, and particularly when we look at it over time and people. So for example, the green team at Hope Community Church was really convicted by this and said, well, what if through our actions at church, we could inspire people to make change? What if we could just 5 families a year decided to make a switch? What would the impact of that be? Well, if we did 5 families a year for 10 years, that would be 50 families over the course of 10 years. Those same 50 families would use up to 14 million disposable items and spend $1.5 million with just 50 families. This is just 50 times the numbers from when we looked at an individual family. We compare that with the cost of doing the reusable items. We've dropped our number of products from 14 million to 5,500. We've dropped our cost from 1.5 million to, even if every family has to buy a washing machine, a dryer, a dishwasher, and operate those things over time, the cost difference is staggering. It's $1.2 million. So as we look at that impact, well, we've got the $1.2 million in savings. The trash impact is 1.2 million pounds of trash that we avoid going into landfills. It's almost 6,000 trees as we look at that. And it's just a tremendous impact as we start to multiply this over time and over people. And that's that idea of those little impacts. When we share them, we expand them, they really, really do add up to big numbers. So with all of this in mind, the green team at Hope Community Church was really excited. And after going through this whole process of discovery and evaluation, They sat down with the leadership of the church and really presented these findings. And their leadership team was enthusiastic about the potential savings, the environmental impact, but at the same time, they were legitimately concerned about where they're going to find the volunteers to actually wash those dishes and do it. So as they talked about it, they excuse me, they agreed that there was a place they could start right away. And that was by reducing the plastic use, the disposable plastic items that they're using, by switching to compostable items right away. So they did agree that this is a place that we can start right away while we figure the rest of this out. And they agreed that they would have a discussion with the congregation to gauge support. And they were really surprised that as they shared this story, just in a brief but direct way with their congregation, that over 20 people stepped up to volunteer to wash dishes once a month, just to make this process possible. So with that in mind, they decided to move forward, and they gave themselves a year to work through this transition, because as they talked to other churches, they realized that, you know, some of this stuff is complex. It takes some time to get them sourced, to get things installed, and a year seems to be about the amount of time that it takes. As they continue to work through this, they're also evaluating other places that they can remove and eliminate disposable and single-use items. And then, as always, we talk about this inspirational piece, right? How can we share this story? And so they developed this wonderful sign, Plates for the Planet. And just posted it in a few places around the kitchen and the storage cabinets for all of these plates and cups, just to remind people that we are actually making a difference. And for new people to come across this, it's an easy way for them to get inspired. So that's the end of our case study. And just to kind of summarize a few things, this idea of reducing and eliminating single-use items, it's I think one of the most visible and easiest entry points into this discussion for a congregation. Yes, there's some complexity around it, but there are things we can do right away. I hope you've been able to see this kind of high cost of convenience, both from a dollar standpoint, from an environmental impact standpoint. And this is just such a great example of how the biggest impact we have as a church might actually be the change that we inspire in others. And again, the small changes yield the big impacts as we sustain them over time and as we share them with other people. And all of these things just continue to give us hope that there is actually things that we can do, that our choices do matter, and that we can move things forward. So that's the end of our case study for tonight. We'll revisit Hope Community Church again in later sessions, but that's the end for tonight. And we're going to now move into a time for discussion to really kind of talk about these things and maybe share stories and experiences that you may have had.
Yes. Yes. And Russ, thank you so much. It is so helpful to see these examples of boots on the ground, more or less, and see these things lived out in case studies and in stories. And I know, I feel like we can see ourselves in different parts of this throughout, at church and at home. So thank you so much. And
and just to be honest, I mean, I was really surprised by a lot of these numbers in the process and preparing it. And I'm happy to share it. I'm glad that we got a chance to.
Absolutely. So one of the things that is really valuable, especially going into this next session or this next breakout room, is the first question. I'm going to post the questions right now, is to just find out if there's somebody in your breakout room who has any experience to share with switching from disposable products to reusable products or compostable products, and just let folks share. We find that there's a lot of different people and stories that are at different parts of this process, or at the beginning, or all the way through it, and have just beautiful, valuable things to share. And so that's one of the first questions. So we are going to head into the second of our breakout rooms. We will be there for about 10 minutes. And then just a reminder to copy the questions out of chat if you haven't already. And then we will come back and spend a very quick time to just share a couple quick takeaways and highlight some implementation that's going to be coming to you, and wrap up. And Russ and I will be staying after for questions and any feedback. So
okay,
Russ,
I'm going to open the rooms.
Talking tunnels. Thank you so much.
Off we go.
And welcome back, everyone. Wonderful, wonderful talks. I hope that was a meaningful time with everyone. I know we have just a couple minutes that we can share. If it's okay, I would love to ask Mimi to share what she was just sharing in our breakout room, if that's okay. And then if there's anybody else you just want to raise a hand, we would love to hear any other takeaways as well. And Mimi, are you, there you are, you're unmuted. Yes, our group was talking about the challenge, Russ, that you had shared too, of not the challenge, the opportunity, I guess, of figuring out who's going to do those dishes and set up and all those things. And so
it's a real issue for sure.
Yeah. And Mimi's church has kind of created an opportunity out of that. So
yeah, at Good Samaritan Episcopal Church in San Diego, California, in La Jolla, we have a position called Sunday Sexton. And every Sunday he comes in a few hours to set up the audio and the coffee and all that. And then aside from that, we have a ministry, the coffee hour host, where they bring the food ready. And then what the Sunday Sexton do is to help work alongside with the coffee hour hosts. So we have a ministry called Coffee Hour Host, and then we have the facility manager who makes sure she sets up all the seats and ready for use when we come on Sunday.
That's great.
fantastic. And it's already put into the budget and everything. And thank you so much, Mimi. That is such a fantastic example. And the other thing I just wanted to share really quickly, and then David's got his hand up, is that Rachel had dropped in the text 13 steps to planning sustainable events. That has been super, super helpful. That they have already been using. And so I just wanted to point that out too.
And thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. It's
Thank you so much. And David, just if you want to share for just a moment. I think you're still muted.
Thank you. Okay. At St. Michael's Episcopal, we're 125-year-old church, so we're very well set up with a big kitchen, a dishwasher. We have a collection of, flatware and cups. We do coffee hour with paper cups, and sometimes paper plates get used. And but historically, there was a time when we didn't do that. We washed that, everything was washed. So I think we'll be talking to our people about going back to some of our traditional ways. But I have a question about plastic water bottles.
Yeah, you bet.
When did that become an essential for us? What's wrong with a cup? At St. Michael's, we used to give away every year at the Carlsbad, the street festival, and we used to give away water bottles with our logo on them. Carlsbad has banned them. And so we just did a thing with the Carlsbad water, which is a special spring water that's there, using their 5-gallon bottles and paper cups, and handed it out to people. Instead of giving them a big bottle of water, we just give them a cup, which is probably all most people really need.
Yes.
And you think about all those plastic bottles discarded, and probably a lot of water too. So going back to things that are traditional ways that our parents and our grandparents did it is maybe a wise move for us.
Yeah, thank you, David, for sharing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. And I know we talked about water a little bit, and water is one of those complex things. And actually, maybe I'll save this for the Q&A so we can actually get through some implementation. And Beck, since we're coming up close on time here,
we'll just go through it quickly.
Why don't we let you go through that? And then if anybody else wants to stick around and share anything or ask questions, we can do it in the Q&A session after we're done, but at least a longer time. So.
Thank you so much for that, David.
Yeah.
So and moving into implementation, this is just a quick review, and then you're going to be getting some things at your fingertips of about Tuesday of next week. So as far as creation friendly hosting that is good for us, good for neighbor, good for creation, this very specific and simple ideas of taking inventory, seeing what you have. David, that was a perfect example.
Yeah.
Of looking at what you have, and then being able to just try to buy less or buy in bulk, and then buying reusables and compostable items if needed. And then just, of course, modeling this at church and inspiring this for homes. So, and of course, moving on, this is great news that we have for you all too. We have curated a simple, very specific, short curated list of reusable items and compostable items that have already been researched. And we were going to be sending this list, this buyer's guide. If it's a place that you'd like to at least start by looking, it'll be there for you coming on Tuesday, just to make it convenient and efficient. If there's some things you want to look at filling in or moving toward, we just wanted to make it easy and convenient. And so this is specifically a place to start. And the other thing that's great about these lists that we're going to send you is most of these items are available in bulk for the church, but they're also available in smaller quantities for home use.
Sure.
So next steps and reminders, of course, we've talked about the taking inventory of the reusable and hosting items that you have. Check out the buyer's guide that we're sending next week. And then anybody who's having monthly congregational meetings, there will be a meeting outline as well coming to you, to the leaders next week. And just, of course, a reminder, our next session is Thursday, December 8th. Purchasing in general and living simply and justly. It should be very wonderful to see that right before Christmas time.
Yes.
But all year through. And just thank you for being here, and happy Thanksgiving. Blessings to you and your families.
Yeah, and if at this point anybody needs to drop off, please thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
If anybody else wants to share anything or ask questions, we can do that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Russ and I will be staying on, and we can answer a few more questions.
Absolutely. All right. Hello. And yeah, there was one thing that came up that I was going to re-share, and it's slipped my mind.
No problem. One of the things that came up in our breakout room too was this idea of, if volunteers are hard to come across for some of the reusable setup and washing and such, that oftentimes the numbers in the budget, because there's so much savings with the reusables, that sometimes
There's
room to hire youth or hire folks to help with that, and which was a perfect example of what Mimi was talking about, which is actually in their budget to have that person available.
Well, did you guys have any questions or comments or feedback? Anything you'd like to share?
Just along the lines of what Mimi said, I know of a church that did intentionally decide that they were just, it would be just to hire someone to do that. Work in the kitchen on Sundays, Wednesdays, and set up a schedule. I said, this is just something we can do. And they had also just gone through a multi-year period of transitioning to where they were actually buying health insurance for all their employees, because before they didn't, have any for their church secretary. Well, then her husband lost his job, and so they had gone through this whole thought process for years, and then decided that, whatever it costs, that they were just going to have to do it.
Yeah. And that's great. And then that's oftentimes it starts with just making a decision to move forward and picking one thing to do. And I know Becky and I have gone through a 6 or 7 year process now of trying to eliminate plastic out of our kitchen and all the process and disposable items. And you just do them one at a time, right? And pick something and fix that and get used to doing that, and then fix the next thing and the next thing, and off you go.
It does simplify a lot, and it actually ends up saving a lot of funds just as an extra bonus. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful that sometimes just the decision to hire that being covered
Yeah,
is
can really enable
if you
things.
look at the economics of it. That Russ, that was a great example with the case study, that there's usually funds available to do it. They just get moved from spending as much.
Oh, yeah, I remember what I was going to share. Sorry, Mimi, I'll share this real quick and then you can go. So this is the second time for us through this case study, and we had to update all of the numbers. And I was thinking about the inflation of the last couple of years, and it was amazing to see how much the prices have changed just from 2021 to today. Is we were comparing things, that a lot of these items were 25 to 30% higher than they were the first time I actually went through this case study. So it was just side note. But go ahead.
That's great ammo.
Yes, exactly. That's very true.
I like your idea of really identifying when you make your inventory of what you really, every item, is it really a need or a want?
Right.
And essentially labor becomes a need.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you say, for example, flowers, instead of flowers, maybe you buy plants and then you make it the live plant instead of a flower like bunches of flowers.
Yep.
And then a flowering plant, and then make it a week so that it will last longer. Then there's a lot of, if you go into that lifestyle of living within, like, take it at the big picture level,
Yeah.
biblically, like what is a need and what is a want, and then we evaluate our standards of living.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
There's a lot that we can do.
Like, for example, I was discussing with my coffee hour host member. When you make this, when you serve, they place I forgot how they call it, like a fancy paper, decorative paper on the plate. And then I asked her, do you really need that? Like, we will not eat it. You are putting it in a clean paper. Why do you still need that?
Or the charger plate.
Yeah. So it's, you know what I mean?
I know exactly. Yeah, maybe
right?
it's so funny because that's a great example of something that, you asked, do you really need it? And when I know, as we were starting to go through our transition to eliminating paper products and plastic products in our own kitchen, when you have to wash the things or go to do the extra effort to it, you really start to ask those questions. Do I really need this? Or can I get rid of this? And and thank you for sharing that. That's
Absolutely.
yeah. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this session. Thank you for spending the evening with us, and we'll see you next month.